Okay, so we're going to start off with our next session, Measuring Success in Your DEI Recreation Programs. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Erin Patchett, AKA EP. You know, CSU has been coming to the Inclusive Sports Summit, I think pretty much for the last 7 years, minus the COVID days in person, but joining virtually. And so they've been great partners with the summit, and so we're excited to have you here again. CSU also does a lot of awesome work in regards to inclusive excellence within recreation. Not gonna lie, we are on their website from CU Rec. What is CSU doing around this work? Can we benchmark? Can we best practice? And so you guys have been great partners with that. So yes, Dr. Erin Patchett, goes by she, her pronouns, is the Director of Administration and Assessment for Campus Recreation at Colorado State University, Fort Collins, CSU. Her career began as an undergraduate student athletic trainer, providing emergency response coverage for both undergraduate student athletic trainers, providing coverage for intramural sports at the University of Iowa. Go Hawks. We're both alums. And again, we were at the NERSA conference last year watching the women's tournament, Iowa versus CU. I was talking both sides out my mouth. I was like, go Hawks, go Buffs, go Hawks. But it was a great matchup. Okay, I digressed. So ultimately, providing coverage for IM sports, Dr. Patchett earned her Bachelor's of Science in Exercise Science and a Master's of Arts in Leisure Studies from the University of Iowa, as well as a Doctor of Philosophy in the Sport Administration from the University of Northern Colorado. She has worked full-time in various operational, programmatic, administrative, and instructional roles in athletics and collegiate recreation at Stanford University, Santa Clara University, and Colorado State University. Her service to the National Intramural Recreation Sports Association, NERSA, has been a part of Erin's journey since graduate school and spans various leadership pathways. A career highlight was her service on the NERSA Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Commission, which included facilitating conversations at annual conferences, as well as contributing to the association's EDI resource guide. Finally, as a strategic leader, she serves on the NERSA Board of Directors in the President Designee role. Please welcome Dr. Erin Patchett.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad Tony started with the Go Hawks, because somehow I would have probably woven it in, and I felt like it was better coming from you, to be honest. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the introduction. I wrote it, right, and then I realized, like, boy, it was shortened that a little. It's awkward to hear someone talk about you, so next time we'll go a little shorter. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about DISJ research, and context. Oh, yeah, thank you. So full context, I came in late to the last session because I was off in the rec center facilitating a NERSA committee meeting a second ago. So I came in late, but I saw like panel, interactive, really good stuff. I'm sorry I missed most of it. This is a pivot. We are going straight into nerdy, researchy, lecture-y content. So get ready for a complete change in how this is gonna go from what you just saw. But I'm excited, so I'm happy to be here to talk about research. It is heavily collegiate rec focused, because there's, a lot of the sport management field is diverse and broad. I'm gonna get into the collegiate rec piece of this a little bit, but I will say there's a couple of research articles I'm sharing today that have connections into athletics as well, so I know there's a good amount of you here today that are working more in the varsity sport side of things. So I'll do my best to be interesting for you all. There is only one learning outcome today, and it was very intentionally written. It is about identifying at least 2 research findings that you can then go explore further. Those words are chosen intentionally because when it comes to research, we really have to think about how things apply to our own context. And so just as one example, I could pull a research article for you today that says X, Y, and Z findings, right? But you gotta read the whole article, because if that research was done, let's say in a religiously affiliated setting, how you make meaning of that on your campus, if you're a private school, it needs to be considered, right? So I just want you to explore further. I'm not saying take it and run with it, I'm saying explore it further, and hopefully it can inform some of the work you're doing on your campuses. Okay, so my first section here is a very brief, because I know myself and I can get out of control quickly on these things. right? I'm just going to give you a 1-2 slider on history of recreation research in the collegiate rec field. And actually, lucky me, somebody did this for me. So this researcher group, French and Cardinal, this is a pretty recent research, they essentially did a retrospective analysis of 200 different articles, research articles published in the RSJ. I'm gonna say that a bunch today. The RSJ is the Recreational Sports Journal, so it's an academic journal for the field of collegiate recreation. This group did basically an analysis of what's been published. They looked at the years of 2005 to 2019. So they did a pretty broad scope in terms of looking at the past research. This is their hot take. It's critical. I appreciate their critical evaluation of the field. They basically said we're not doing enough. They looked at what 200 plus articles and said it's not good enough. They found a lot of research articles where, you know, of course the issue itself was something else, and then they broke down demographics and said, and here's how folks of diverse races think of this, or folks of diverse gender identities think of this. And that's a good start. I don't want to minimize that because that's important. But when they actually looked at what was the research issue at hand, this is what they found. And this is what led to their evaluation that we need to do more as a field with research. Only 200 articles, just as a reminder, only 7 touched race as an issue they were looking at. Only 19, that's the highest, looked at gender. Nationality was low, single digits on sexual orientation. 0 looked at class, or SES, so socioeconomic status. I hate that word, I struggle to say it, so I'm gonna say class. Disability, only 2, right? So that's not maybe the best evaluation of how our field is doing around research. It's definitely a call to action. I'm gonna talk a little bit more later about how there has actually been a call to action, and there's actually well, I'll just say it now. Why not get off track right away? There is a special edition of the Rec Sports Journal, the RSJ, coming out in 2024, this year. I'm a little unclear. Is it April or is it November? I'm not sure, but sometime this year there'll be an actual issue that focuses on this, and it won't be the first one. So I think it's gotten better, but I just want to paint a picture of, like, you know, we've got work to do. That's no surprise. Okay, that was it. See, 2 slides on history. Let's move into current topics. So the next couple slides are more of a look at the last 5 years in research, because I would say, while French and Cardinal, you know, found there wasn't a lot percentage-wise that looked at diverse issues, I actually feel like anecdotally it's gotten better since 2019. I don't have math or any formal research to verify that, so hear me clearly. Anecdotally, I think it has gotten better. I know I have cited quite a bit of research from 2019 and more modern that does touch on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion that are really central to that research topic. So, okay, so what's the goal with this next section? My goal is to share just enough information to keep you interested. So I'm gonna plant a seed. I'm gonna play this game where I plant a seed. I hope it piques your interest. I hope you connect into it somehow and think like, oh, yeah, we should further explore this. And again, I've already said this, but it's for a particular reason, because I'm sharing, I'm nitpicking outcomes, right? I'm picking implications from the research that are meaningful to me. That is already biased because I have selected what I'm sharing. And then that piece I've already shared of, you really need to dive into the full article to decide, like, you know, does this transfer to my setting? There's a good amount of qualitative research I'm sharing here today, and really, with qualitative research, you think about something called transferability. Are there any research nerds in here? Oh my gosh, okay, thanks, TJ. Okay, I should have asked that from the front end, because that really helps me gear how I'm talking about this. Well, you know, maybe someday you'll be a research nerd. Come talk to me then. Let me talk a little bit about transferability. That's essentially like an invitation for you as a reader of research to make meaning of it for you and your context, right? So you got to read the whole thing and decide, does this setting and the way they did the research, does it connect to me or my institution, right? So I'm planting a seed with the hopes that you will then go and start your nerdy journey and read the full research article. All right, I have about 5 slides that touch on different identity groups. And I will say, for the most part, they're singular, which is not how people live their lives, right? Someone with a disability might also have other marginalized identities. However, the focus of these research articles were generally in the identity group that's named on the slide. So this first one, Shapiro et al. So if you aren't heavily involved in research, you should read et al. To mean, and friends. So Shapiro and friends did this research article in 2020 that looked at disability. The title of the article was "A Multi-Institutional Review of College Campuses' Adaptive Intramural Programming for College Students." So that gives you a little bit of scope of what they were investigating. And for each of these slides, so I'll just show you a couple. I'm giving you 2 takeaways. And I think in some ways, the first couple slides, I get a little mixed up here. So I'm a researcher, but I'm a practitioner. So I will try to be clear when I'm sharing research information and when I'm sort of taking that off and talking more practitioner or anecdotally. I think the first couple of slides are actually best practices. So I would encourage you to think through, like, the learning outcome is what will you take away and implement on your own campuses. I think the first 2 slides are things we need to be doing already. So if you're not, that might be a good place to start when you go back to your campus, or stay here, because I think a lot of you are on this campus. Okay, so train the staff, what does that mean? When they looked at this one, their recommendation or one of the outcomes of that research was you have to train your staff. And that's what I mean by, I think we know this, right? Like, that's a best, oh, hi, I'm ignoring the side of the room. That's a best practice to train staff. What they said, though, and I think the context of this matters, it is dangerous to offer something like adaptive programming for intramural sports, to put that all out there in the world on your campus and not train your staff to be culturally competent around disability issues, right? There's a lot more harm that's likely to happen if you've not specifically and intentionally trained your staff about how disability shows up in our spaces around recreation, around athletics. So that was their first recommendation. You know, we all hold a lot of unconscious bias, and disability is one of them, one of the many that we hold, and so we have to be really thoughtful about how we train our staff. That asterisk up there that I can barely see, so who knows if you can. I could have made the fonts a little bigger. It is referencing another research article that I didn't want to forget, so that's why it's there. So Anderson and friends. Anderson and friends also did some research. It wasn't on disability, it was actually on LGBTQ issues and trainings, and they actually found there's actual research evidence that by doing, they essentially did a safe zone. They did like a modified safe zone training. They did it for rec staff, so rec student employees, and they found a positive outcome. So I think we all hope when we do these trainings around different identity groups that there's a change in the students and a change in ourselves. Anderson et al. Found that. They found that. And so I think when we think about training our staffs, at CSU, one of the trainings we offer is called Inclusivity 101. It's as general as it sounds. We're talking about definitions of equity, diversity, inclusion, what that looks like with our policies. I lead those sessions, and we don't explicitly say anything about disability, right, or gender identity. It's really global. And so this is a call to action in terms of, like, we can do that. There's nothing wrong with that kind of training, but how are you diving deeper and being really specific around diverse identities and how they are showing up or how they are impacted by what we do on our campuses? You have to dive deeper, I think, when you're training your staff. Okay, moving on, build the program. So I'm from Iowa. Tony has already shared that. Who's seen Field of Dreams? Great. If you haven't seen it, it's a great baseball movie. It's filmed in Iowa, so of course that's my reference point. What's the quote from that movie that connects into this? Do you all know it? Thank you. If you build it, they will come. Okay, so that's, all right, enough with Iowa, but I think that's the last time I'll say that. No promises. So you need to build the programs first. I have heard this narrative. I have probably perpetuated this narrative, to be honest, during my, the scope of my career, that, like, well, there are no students with disabilities showing up and asking for this program, so why would I build it? That's not the approach that centers justice and equity. The approach and what the researcher shared here is you need to build the program. You can't wait for students with disabilities to express a need. That is an unfair extra step you're asking them to process through, essentially. And so these researchers say, build the program first. Then go out and market it, right? Then go connect with other offices on your campus and make sure those students know about your adaptive intramural program, your adaptive or unified sports programming, et cetera. There are quite a few sports, so I try to hold on to, these recommendations are important, and they're done in a context where higher education funding is not something to just take lightly, and sometimes our budgets are a concern when we are trying to do things in an equitable manner. I don't think it should stop us per se, but we have to consider it. So when I think about what I know about adaptive recreation programming, and the researchers talk about this as well, there's quite a few sports that you can adapt with minimal changes to your equipment, right? So I think of things like goal ball. There's minimal equipment needed for that sport. I think about things like sit volleyball. There's nothing new needed to do sit volleyball. You have everything you need, essentially. So those are some things to keep in mind. Okay, that is slide 1 of the research. I know, you all are so excited, just like I am. Okay, gender identity is next. Wilson and Friends, another 2 recommendations that I would argue these are nearly best practices at this point, and even if they weren't, I think there's a lot of stuff we need to consider about what is right to do, even if it's not a best practice yet. So all gender spaces are one of their recommendations. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. So this is an article called Transgender and Non-Binary College Student Inclusivity in Campus Recreation, Perceptions of North American Staff. I'm assuming it's North American staff because NERSA, which Tony talked about, our governing body essentially, is an international organization, although it's mostly North America, so it's heavily US and Canada, I would say. And so I think this research looked at Canadian counterparts as well, which is good to have. All gender spaces as a best practice. So essentially they're saying if you are renovating or building something new, you have to put all gender bathrooms, all gender locker room spaces into your facility. If you don't have that capacity right now, how can you take single stalls, right, that are gendered and turn them into all gender spaces, things along those lines. But they push it farther and say, it's important to offer them, but if no one on your campus knows about them, that might be a reason someone's not coming into your building. So how are you marketing it? How are you connecting with other campus partners to ensure, you know, at CSU, it's the Pride Center. How do we make sure Pride knows about the all gender changing rooms and our locker set up there where you can, you know, you can rent lockers in that space. The other one here is policy. So I mean, to have anti-discrimination policies is not really a choice. That is something that is governed, right, by some federal legislation, thankfully. The question here, though, is it's one thing to have a policy to protect people with diverse identities, especially around gender. It's another thing to train your staff. So I look over here because I know we've got a bunch of facilities folks. It's one thing to have a policy written in your campus rec handbook. If you don't train up your staff, which, look at that, going back to train the staff has multiple implications, right? If you aren't training your staff on inclusive ways to enforce that policy, and really honestly just prepping them how to have a conversation that can be difficult if someone is complaining about who's in a particular gendered locker room, then we're setting ourselves up to kind of fail, right, with our staffs, because our students are often the ones enforcing these policies. So we gotta, you know, train them up and make sure they're empowered to enforce policies in an inclusive manner. Okay, next one. So this, Voiles and Friends, they framed it as sexual minorities. I'm gonna say they looked at athletes who identified as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So this is really targeted towards sexual orientation, not so much gender identity, just to be really clear about how we often put the LGBTQ umbrella together, but they mean really different things for some people, not everyone. So Voiles and Friends, they did this article, and this is why I'm reading the article titles, because this one I think hits really, it hits really hard. This is a quote probably from a research participant, if I were to guess. And it says, "A group of guys is enough to really scare me in general. Sexual minorities vetting of athletic spaces." This one's a good one for everyone in the room because they did actually interview research participants who were NCAA varsity athletes as well as recreational sports athletes, which are often on our side with collegiate rec. We're often talking like club sport athletes or intramural sports athletes, just to give you context if you need it. Okay, so what did these authors find? This first one about vetting spaces, I think is really important for us to hear if we don't identify as LGB, because you know there's a lot of privilege in many identities. This is maybe not something we think about as professionals, and if we're not thinking about it as professionals, are we ensuring our students are thinking about it, and are we really adapting how we operate to be inclusive of an entire spectrum of sexual orientation identities? So what did they find in vetting of spaces? So they found that sexual minorities find and build supportive athletic communities by vetting spaces for evidence of inclusion. I think that kind of makes sense, but also then if this is not an identity you hold, think about the last time you thought about going into a fitness center or a rec center or even to a varsity sports game, right? Did you have to think about that to enter that space? And so that's why I think this is a powerful reminder that some people are not even coming into our buildings without significant vetting of what they need to look for to clue them in that they'll be safe in that space. So they're looking for evidence of queer allyship. They're looking for broader markers of diversity. So even though this one is talking about, sexual orientation identities, they might be looking for other visual markers of identity too, because they're, those are not the same, but there might be evidence that the place is safe and inclusive if they can see other markers of diversity. This does look different in varsity versus recreation, so this is my, continued plug to go read this further, because you can split out what it means for you if you're on the athletic side of the house versus the recreation side of the house. But what they did find for those of us who are in the recreation space, they found that what happens with the participants, at least in this study, they will come to campus first. They'll get settled first. They may even delay their sport participation for a while they try to figure out, which club has a queer reputation, or, which space feels like they have enough connections to that proves it's a space they can get into with less risk of harm to them. Okay, so that's the vetting of spaces piece. The vocal allies piece, I think, is also a good sharing here of an implication of the research, because if you don't identify perhaps as LGB, for the rest of us who need to show up as allies, this is a way we can do it that's research informed, right? So what they said is just having one vocal ally or one other person who identifies as LGB increase their chance of engaging sooner. So there's no delay. And the folks in the room who are collegiate rec professionals, all of the tremendous benefits that are, again, research informed about participation. What does it do for us, for our students? Sense of belonging, health and well-being, time management. Like, it spans all kinds of dimensions of well-being. And so to even think about someone delaying that participation for even their first year, I think is it's harmful to them, right? And so we need to think about how we can minimize that gap so they are not delaying their participation. So how do we show up as visible allies, right? Some of the recommendations from this research article were to incorporate pride symbols. I know a lot of folks do that, right? They do the Safe Zone training, then they put that on their office placard. Or I don't know how many folks at Boulder do this. It's all over at CSU. Who's got pronouns in their email signature? Raise your hands. Okay, who has an explanation about the pronouns? Who connects into a website that explains what they're for? Awesome. That might be just a really small takeaway today that was accidental. I wasn't even gonna do that. So not everyone knows why people share pronouns, and that's okay, right? Let's invite them into the conversation, link them to a website and see if they can learn a little bit more about why people do share their pronouns and how that can help be one marker of an inclusive environment. So yeah, pride symbols, who are you sharing in your media campaigns for sport clubs as an example? Thinking through, so I know the sport, who's in sport clubs here? Are there any sport club folks? Okay, I was like, poor just Darrell. Okay, so I'm talking right at you then, my friend. Thinking through how on the sport club side of the house, for those of you not in athletics, our coaches are often volunteers, not always. They maybe get a paid stipend. They have a complicated employment relationship with our university because they're maybe not always truly employees. They might be independent contractors. They might be temp hourlies. They're rarely faculty and staff. And I say that to share that might mean our connections into them and our ability to kind of inform how they are doing their coaching work is a little bit different. I'm being really careful with my words here. It could be more difficult. I'll just say it. It could be more difficult. And so how do you think about, Darrell, how do you think about my sport club friend? How do you think about the coaches themselves? Are they, when they meet new athletes or when they do tryouts, are they introducing themselves with their pronouns? Are they setting a culture that welcomes and gives real clear markers that they're an ally for queer students? And do they intervene when problematic things happen? Because I think we all know our spaces are not free of those things yet. And so how are those sport club coaches intervening? And if they're not, what does that look like for sport club coach training, as one example? Okay, the next one, this is actually the only article that looked at more intersecting, or the intersections of identity. This one was focused on race, but it heavily hit on class, or again, that word I struggle with, socioeconomic status. So Patterson and Dorwart from 2019, this is the oldest one I'm sharing today. I think it just was missed on that last article I shared that was like the content analysis. I don't think this one was included in it. So this one is called A Gateway to Learning, Exploring the Role of Campus Rec and Leisure Experiences in Developing a Sense of Purpose for African American Males at a PWI. I think this particular one is important because we, a lot of the folks in this room represent, PWI schools, and this is important for us to consider, knowing that that's our status. Are you an HSI? No, okay. Or an MSI? Sorry, I should be broader. No, okay. So their outcomes here, fees slash, I'm gonna call it fees slash classism. What did they say? So to better serve folks, in particular, what the study looked at, African-American males, they talked about how we really need to consider how much we charge for what we're doing. So most of us are fee funded in campus recreation. So a student is gonna pay a set fee based on when they hit probably full-time status at your institution, whatever that is, or at CSU, it's once they're in 6 credits or more, they pay a fee. That just gets them in the door. Now, it gets them access to the fitness center. I'm giving context so that everyone in the room understands what I'm saying here. So gets you into the building, gets you access to the fitness center, the weight room, to drop in sports. But then that's where there's a little bit of a gap, or like two different paths here. I don't know what Boulder's status is with your fees and your additional charges. At CSU, once you're in the door, you have to pay more to play in intramurals. You have to pay more to do outdoor programs. You have to pay more, I'm going through things. You have to pay more for massage. That makes sense, I think, probably. You have to pay more to go through the personal trainer certification program. So while the student fees get them a lot, it doesn't get them everything. And so when you're thinking about how some of our programs really contribute to sense of purpose, sense of belonging for diverse students, if there is a class, if class is in play there, we're now asking them to spend even more money that they don't have, and now they are excluded yet again from a program. So how can we make our fees as low as possible? At CSU, we've removed our yoga pass, we've removed our cycle pass fee. Our IM fee is pretty affordable, but then I say that as a person who's salaried, right? And so that lens is totally privileged. It's $10 for a semester to play as many intramurals as you want. What else is free? Am I missing anything? So no additional fees for some of those programs. We can't reduce every fee though. Like our budget situation, honestly, right now, is tough. And so while we talk about could we remove more, the answer probably right now is no. But what we're doing, and Tony, I meant to throw this in earlier. Tony talked about benchmarking off of us. We benchmark off of you all. The recreation department here is phenomenal. We benchmark off of them, to the point where even recently we did it again, and I found something on your website that we're implementing that's related to inclusive programming. You have a form where students can submit things, and we're like, yes, why are we not doing that? So we've implemented a way for students to suggest programs differently. But sorry, I got off track. So one of the things that this article recommends is if you can't lower your fees, do you have some sort of grant or fee waiver option? So if a student has a true financial need, can they apply for funds? CU Boulder's doing that, and we are modeling our program that we're creating right now off of that. Also, the last piece about fees slash classism is looking at your policies and really investigating whether or not there is classism rooted into your policies and your procedures. And again, that can be a tough one because if you're in a place of privilege around class, it can be hard to look at policies and see where they lack inclusion. Nonetheless, it's something we need to do. And so here's an example just so you can connect into something and have an idea of what this means. So CSU, so outside of the research, now we're talking practitioner stuff. At CSU a number of years ago, we actually did a social identity assessment project around class. And we found one policy in particular, so we have, what's it called, the IPF, the Indoor Practice Facility is an athletic building on our campus. It's our indoor turf. It's where the football team, among others, practice. And it's right behind us, so it's really close to our rec center. They don't use it at night much and rarely on weekends, and so we actually have an MOU where it's a shared facility and we have pretty set access times. But when we signed that MOU, we had to agree to like a lot of policies to preserve the space. Understandable, right? We want to take care of our buildings. They were worried about the turf. And so we used to have an intramural sports policy where you show up into the IPF wearing your shoes, and then you must have a second pair of shoes, no matter what, that you change into. And that sounds minimal to me because, yeah, I have cleats. Like, of course I have cleats. I play flag football still. Not very fast, but I love it. But for a student who's choosing between secondhand cleats and dinner for the week, that is it's a limitation, right? And so we've changed that policy. What was the end goal? To have clean shoes, right? Athletics wants us to take care of the turf, totally understand. So what happens now is that policy is gone. My understanding, I'm removed from intramurals these days, but the last I knew, they come in their shoes. If their shoes are dirty, that's fine. They walk into the bathroom and clean off the soles. Good, one pair of shoes, that's all you need. That's just one example of how we really need to assess the ways that our own policies and practices might be restricting access. Okay. Oh, I'm good. Oh, go me. Okay, campus collaborations is the other recommendation out of this particular research article. Campus partners are here to serve diverse students. I'm not sure what they're called here at CU Boulder. At CSU, they're called the Student Diversity and Programs Offices, SDPS. I might have messed that acronym up, but that's what it means. So these researchers are saying, you can't just wait for folks to come into your building. You have to go out and spread the word about what you're offering and maybe even partner, right? So as I know you all do this while here. So, but some examples of what that might look like. We've had our back office, which is our Black African American Cultural Center, has come in and done like a climbing night. They also do some programming. They lead it. They just rent our space and they do volleyball in our MAC gym during what they call Black Healing Week, which is finals week, where they're just trying to get their community together and move their bodies as a break from studying. We've partnered with the Women and Gender Advocacy Center to do a trauma-informed yoga speaker in our building last April, and it was an awesome partnership. So you can look at those offices, you can look at your union, your housing offices, your counseling and wellness centers if they're not already part of your umbrella. There's a lot of ways to do this. My one caveat here is like, what's my caveat? How am I gonna say this? So we need to be less needy as we partner. I think we need to show up as actual, true collaborators and not offices that are just constantly asking these offices to do more work, right? And so I think we need to be really, I don't know if you've ever seen the collaboration continuum. If you Google it, it'll probably just pop up. But it's a good reminder of how the partnering and who shows up and brings what. There is a spectrum there, of course. And I think sometimes we just say like, hey, would you just partner with us so we can serve this identity group? And then we forget that we need to be equal partners in that, if not more, because I don't know how it is on some of your campuses, but sometimes those offices are under-resourced. So to ask them to do more is just perpetuating some systems of oppression on your campus. Okay, one more. Policies and procedures. So this is Wilson again and their friends. Wilson and their friends from 2022 did a study about policies and practices for equity, and then this is another perspectives of campus rec staff in North America. I think they actually collected data from multiple studies all at once, which is super smart, and then put out multiple research articles. This one I think is good because it's important to focus on identities. We've talked about that already, but also I think it's important to be global and think through big picture policies and procedures and what they mean for us. So the first one of these findings I'm sharing today with my own biases of picking information to share, they talk a lot about gaps. So in this research article, they actually they kind of asked the staff, hey, what is, do you have this thing? Do you have this kind of policy around maybe gender equity or around class or around disability? Do you have it? And then their other question was, how are you doing? What's your performance on it? And I think that's a really smart thing for us to ask because it forces us to get out of the checkbox zone. Do we have gender diverse policies? Check. That's only the first move, right? The next move is, are gender diverse people safe in our buildings because the policies are being upheld? So they found, and I don't find this to be terribly a big surprise, when they looked at it, there were significant gaps between the importance of a policy, the presence of it, and the performance of it. And it's not like gaps in a good direction. There's gaps in the not good direction. So I think we need to hold this. This is another one where no matter where you work, I think you could leave right now and do a process of examining your policies and asking your staff and maybe your stakeholder groups, we've got this, yes, how do you think we're doing on it? I think that would be an easy takeaway from today's session. But that's my perception. Easy for me, that doesn't mean anything for you. But maybe I invite you to consider it. Okay, the most common policies is the second outcome of this study. So let me actually show you these because I think this is pretty compelling. So These are most of what was in the article for most common policies. I left a couple off that were a little too general for me to explain in this session today. But you'll see, this is in order of the percentages. So accessibility for students with disabilities, gender equity, programming for all is this idea of, it's more, I would reframe that to say like social identity centered programming, right? So like that example I gave of back night at the climbing wall or trauma informed yoga, it's that, or like LGBTQ tours of our facility for the Pride Resource Center students. They're talking about that when they say programming for all. Stuff around hiring and training. So some of these are policies, some of these are more procedures. Intramural sports came up a lot, low and no cost, and I'm not gonna go backwards, but remember fees were one of the outcomes from a different research article. Marketing, and I heard a talk, as I came in late, I know there was a conversation about tokenizing and what's the definition of that. So again, when it comes to marketing, I think we need to be really thoughtful. To have inclusive marketing, there's a fine line there between absolutely tokenizing people of different identities. And then non-discrimination policies. So these are some of the things where, again, as you look at what are, 2 takeaways you can have from today to go pursue further, I think this article honestly is maybe my top recommendation, because I think this is a good way for you to sit down. You could sit down and look at things through the lens of these policies and wonder, do you have them? A, are they working? B. Okay, so we're done with the research. If you're still awake, we're friends now. Thanks for hanging in there. I realize this delivery method is not the best for everyone's learning style. And also, I'm here to talk about research, and sometimes you just have to have slides to talk about research. I couldn't remember all of this. Now I'm gonna shift gears kind of totally, completely, but same topic. Like we're still gonna talk about DEI framing, but I'm gonna talk about it from the NERSA lens. NERSA, which is our governing association for collegiate rec, it's like your NCAA, not quite, but sort of. That's the closest comparison I can make for you all. NERSA's done a lot of work, and it's important to know the history of NERSA and the work that the association has done. In particular, knowing that because of our founding, the principles of diversity, inclusion, and equity matter, and they need to continue to be centered. If you don't know NERSA's founding history, NERSA was founded a long time ago by 11 HBCUs who came together to try to, put strategy and community behind serving students through intramural sports. So with that kind of founding, you would imagine DEIJ, DEISJ has been important. It's also not been perfect. Just because of that founding, that doesn't negate a lot of problematic stuff in our association, such as women at one point being excluded as members. Like that's not a great look. Also founded by folks at HBCUs, and then if you go look at the president's page, you're gonna find many years of white men leading the association, right? And so problematic from those lenses as well. Okay, so what do I wanna share about NERSA? And Tony introduced me and said I'm a part of the board. I just want to be really clear that I probably would be sharing all this stuff either way. I've always been pretty tightly connected into NERSA, and I believe in, using the resources provided to you by your association, and these are things that NERSA has provided to us as members. So the first thing up there is just kind of it's just a run through of what the EDI Commission did in the time it existed. The EDI Commission was created in 2011, I think is what the slide says. I can't read it from here. I'm going off of memory now. I think it was created in 2011, and they were a part of things like creating statements for the association around around EDI in general, around marriage equality. That might seem like not a lot. I mean, to make a statement is not a terribly hard thing for a board of directors to do. But during those times, there were a lot of members who really wanted to hear from the association to affirm what was going on contextually in the US around a lot of different things, a lot of different laws. They also helped create with another group in our association the trans athlete policy, which is incredibly inclusive compared to some other spaces. Rec is just a little different. And so we're able to really minimize a lot of things around surgeries required, hormones required. That's not what we're here for. We're really open for participation for all with no limits. We're still competitive, don't get me wrong, but it just looks different in our side. And so, yeah, there's a policy around that that's informing a lot of ways we offer events. And then the last thing is the EDI resource guide. For the collegiate rec professionals in the room, if you've used the EDI resource guide to train your students or your pro staff, will you raise your hand? Okay, so this is another real easy win for your offices. This document is free to members. You download it once and then you have it forever. So even if your membership lapses, it's still yours to keep. It's a giant, like 200-page PDF. The front half is educational materials around different identity groups. So you could use that for your own reading and education. But the real win, I think, in this document is the last half are case studies. And training your staff on place, time, context matters. So to just talk about, what would you do if someone said something discriminatory in the grocery store? Sure, that's a good conversation to have. But what would you do if someone said something discriminatory during your intramural sports game? That is a different conversation. And so we really need to train our staff in the context with which they're going to interact, right, to enforce diversity, inclusion, access, equity, to center those things. So please download this. I would almost offer to send it to you, but this is being broadcast and that would be totally inappropriate as a board member to share a resource. But I guarantee someone on your campus probably has it. Okay, the other part is the most recent stuff going on in our field. So in 2020, NERSA partnered with an outside company to do a climate study. This was following a lot of the stuff that happened in 2020 in terms of, racial injustice. I'm not going to say becoming popular. I'm going to say getting more airtime. It was always there. It's not like all of a sudden it started happening, right? You all know this. But as a result of that, and a result of the conversations really that not everyone, a lot of folks were having, in particular in higher ed though, I think a lot of us in higher ed were having it, they did a climate study. And the climate study resulted in a lot of recommendations of how to make sure our members are feeling included, affirmed, valued, also that we have policies, procedures that make sense to protect people within the association who are members themselves. And so some of that work is actually out now. So I don't know, I'm gonna do this again because it's my only way to be interactive. Who's read our NERSA expectation for belonging statement that came out in November? Okay, so another easy win, friends. This came out in the NERSA Know, which is our newsletter. I'm gonna share it in a second, but I'm not gonna give you enough time to read it. I'm just gonna show it to you, and so you gotta go do this homework on your own. That is out finally, and it's really about setting foundational understanding about what we're even talking about. It's definitions, granted that's kind of a low-hanging fruit, but really if we're gonna have this conversation, we need to make sure we're talking about the same things, right? So it's definitional based, that's not even a word, but that's what it is. The other two things that are coming soon from NERSA in terms of that, the JEDI, nope, that's not what they call themselves, the JDEI work team is soon there'll be grievance processes cleaned up so that if you do have any experiences that are problematic or discriminatory, you'll have a clear path forward on that. And then the one I'm really excited about, I think, is more so that last bullet. They are actively working right now on learning outcomes that are gonna inform some more regimented and structurally, foundational trainings for us as members around diversity and inclusion topics. There's a lot of this already in our field. There's a lot of this at conference every year, but there's not really a clear curriculum right now. And so how would you know how to kind of move through that information as a young professional, as one example? Okay, how am I doing? Oh, really good for me. So shared expectations for belonging, I'm gonna just be quiet for a second. This is the first part of the statement. What I like the most about it is how it's acknowledging harm in the past. NERSA is not a perfect association, but strives to do better. So there's that piece of that showing up in the front half of our shared expectations for belonging. Yeah, so that's all I'll say about that as I sort of just waste some time to make sure you can read it. Okay. It's on NERSA's website, so if you do want to read it more in depth, you can do that. And then here's what I mean by these. So we're framing belonging, which is a huge focus, I think, on our college campuses. We're framing it as, how could anyone belong if they're not experiencing justice, diversity, inclusion, equity, and respect? So those things are very DEI, SJ-centric, right? And then they lift up people to inform how they can experience a sense of belonging on our campus. So go read that if you're a NERSA member, or if you're not. I think it's a good model. Okay, so what now? What are you gonna do from here? I've already peppered this entire thing with what you could maybe do, but here's the formal 4 things that I'm gonna recommend. The first one is that QR code, if you can get to it, is your access to the RSJ. If you're a NERSA member, you have free access to the RSJ. It comes out twice a year. And I already spoiled how there's going to be a DEISJ special edition coming out this year. If you really, I didn't see a lot of hands raised around nerds in this room, and that's okay, but growth mindset, you're not nerds yet. And so one way to become nerdier is to go sign up on, so if you go to scholar.google.com and then sign in with your Google account, you can actually set an alert where Google will email you anytime research comes out on a particular topic. So I get emails like once a week that are framed around DEI stuff. You could easily use this for other things, right? Like what's the environmental scan on research around organizational leadership? Or what's the environmental scan around research on generations in the workforce? There's all kinds of things you could do. This is an easy entry, I think, to just see even what the titles are called, and maybe someday down the road you click into them and read them. You could also create a nerd group. That's not gonna probably hit with this room right now, based on who raised their hand, but maybe down the road, what you do is you pick 5 articles out of the RSJ and you assign them to 5 members of your team. You all go read those on your own. You make a short little, summary or an annotated bibliography if you really want to get weird. And then you come together over lunch and talk about what you learned. And then if you heard your friend Lauren read, one article and it was amazing, you can go follow up further. But you don't have to read 5 articles. You only have to read 1 unless you want to learn more. And then my last ask for you is to gather data. So those of you in the room who are, doing really great things on your campus, make sure you're collecting information about that. Now that's assessment, because that's your campus only, right? That's not research, but assessment also matters. And then when Tony finds out that this program is just absolutely killing it in terms of supporting diverse students and their sense of belonging, then Tony's gonna come and tell other campus people about it. And while maybe, and it might not just be Tony, because I know there's a lot of CU folks in the room, and then maybe that doesn't apply exactly perfectly at my institution, but I can at least start from there and hopefully really make an impact on a college campus at CSU instead. So please collect assessment data and then share it. Okay, that's all I have today, but I have another caveat. It's not my first, but it is my last caveat. I just offered lots of information and then asked you to do a little bit of homework or action afterwards. And I say that knowing that I relate into what I'm about to say, so I feel like this is I statement stuff. I have spent a lot of the past 4 years being overworked by student affairs grind culture. I think athletics has that as well. They did when I worked in athletics. So I just said, go do all this stuff, it's easy. And I just want you to know, if you're covering more than one job right now, I totally see you. Maybe now's not the time to go do all this homework, maybe someday, maybe a year from now. But if you're feeling that right now, I'm sorry, it'll get better. Do this later, save it for a year. When you've got all the staff you need, then come back and do this work. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks. Oh, I keep stepping off the stage. Sorry. Good thing I'm athletic. Throw me a football, and then I'll catch it as I step off the stage.
Do we have any questions from Zoom? I don't know if Louise, we do.
I got it. I got it, Louisa. Mainly because I have a mic.
Where? He's over there. Oh.
So we have one question from Zoom that says, how do you recommend making changes to policies at a campus level? For example, CU Athletics has tried to implement their own DEI policies, but other groups on campus refused to support them and had them removed.
Well, that's a great question. Well, my first response is you have to know your campus, and I don't know the campus we're asking about. So I'm gonna sort of answer this, but not answer this. At CSU, we also have issues. I'm not saying athletics specifically, since that was the question framing. And what have we done to try to tackle policy at campus level? Well, if there isn't already a committee for it, I hate to recommend committees, but I've actually seen some good work happen out of them. So is there a way to provide paths forward through committees that have diverse members on them? And I mean that in all kinds of ways, but in particular, who's represented campus-wide, right? Do you have student affairs people? Do you have academic affairs people? Do you have athletics people? So that'd be one path forward. And then, again, because I don't know the culture here, so I can't speak to what would work here, so I'm gonna share other wins I've seen at CSU. I'm gonna use an example around salary equity. Does anyone here have issues with salary equity on their campus? Okay. I mean, I was assuming everyone does. So do we. However, through both grassroots efforts, right, people just literally gathering to drop in basketball and shoot hoops and talk crap and make strategy from the ground level up, and then from the top level as well. We've made some real difference in our division. It's not perfect, so I'm not saying that, my friends, but we've made a lot of changes in the past year to help with salary equity. Fort Collins is expensive. I know Boulder folks are like, whatever, we got you, hold my beer. But it is expensive in Fort Collins too, and so I think really my recommendation as someone who's a middle manager is to find your allies and get loud in ways where people they can't ignore you anymore, right? We let too many people leave our institution, and now a lot of people are gone because of these things, whether it's salary or whether it's other issues of DEI, SJ. And we can't do that anymore. We can't let people keep leaving for things we actually have control over if folks would just listen differently. So keep finding places to advocate. It won't be fixed immediately, but I hope eventually you'll have paths forward. That's my non-answer answer, because context matters.
One last question from the audience?
Anyone want to watch me fall off the stage one more time? Thanks, Erin.
Hi. So from either an athletics or a campus rec perspective, what are some initiatives you've seen kind of across the country, like short term, to be more inclusive ADA when you're working with older facilities? Obviously, long term requires money and structural change, but what are some good like short term initiatives to kind of bridge that gap?
So it depends a little bit on your actual facility setup, but do you have any single stall bathrooms?
Yes.
Okay, and are they gendered?
No.
Okay, well that's usually the first step, is like if you've got a lockable single room bathroom that's for men and one that's for women, there's a quick change of put a sign up that says all gender and make them both all gender, right? So I think that's one that, honestly, even just when I go into restaurants, there are so many restaurants who've not yet done that, which is a huge miss for them. So I think that's one thing. I'm trying to think what else would be short term for gender inclusive facilities. It is expensive. What campus are you at?
This one.
Oh, hi. Does your rec center have all gender spaces? It does.
We do,
Yeah.
and so we were able to apply for a DEI campus grant to help add additional all-gender locker spaces, and so again, just working with campus partners around that work.
Yeah, and so that was going to be my next recommendation, but you're here, so at Boulder. The other thing I've seen other campuses do, and again, I'm hesitant around committee work, but sometimes committees are effective. It all depends on who you put on them. But CSU's campus actually has written policies around this so that they can get support for transforming existing facilities, but also making sure we never build another facility in the future that's not already meeting this best practice. So I think those are a couple things. I also wonder, how do you partner with student government? The student government cares about stuff like this, and they are often making financial decisions about where to put fees, where to put money. Is that something you could partner with student government on, whether that's Boulder or other campuses? The students care differently these days. Have you noticed this? It's amazing, right? We need to partner with them on these things.
Okay, we are at time. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Patchett. Nerds run the world. If we didn't have nerds, research nerds, we'd be in trouble.